meeting for the town of Exeter. I'll start with the introductions of the members present, starting at my far right with Don.
New member.
Our new member, actually, and welcome back.
Alternate.
Right. So Don
How are you?
Clement.
Nice to be home.
Welcome.
Trevor Matera.
Sally Ward.
Bill Campbell.
Andrew Koff.
Dave Short.
Okay. First thing on the agenda is public comment. I believe there are a few people here who would like to say something that's not on the agenda otherwise.
Hello. Good evening. My name is Rebecca Moore, and I thank you for giving me the opportunity to address you in this time for public comment. I'm returning to speak to you on behalf of 4 of the 5 property owner households on Nelson Drive off Court Street in Exeter. In September, we came to your meeting and recorded our concerns about the problems of water on our properties and our concern about the protection of water-absorbing buffers in the land on Lot 8356, proximal to the wetlands along the Little River. You let us know that you understood the concern, but would need to see a building permit in order to offer an opinion. In December, Lot 8356 was given a building permit for the construction of a new single-family home and large barn. As neighbors and abutters to the proposed buildings, we remain concerned that such structures would adversely affect the buffering capabilities of the wetlands and land included on the plot. Again, the Exeter Master Plan supports the idea that climate change is real and that we need to prepare for increased rainfall and to value our buffer zones. We continue to appreciate the master plan's recognition of climate change and the predicted threat of development to current properties and the town's environment in general. When the building permit was filed in December, we engaged a lawyer to advise us on the legality of the town's interpretation of the 1967 grandfathered building rules. We plan to make a public objection to the proposed building. The lawyer concluded that the planned building will be in violation of the current buffer rules. That said, the lawyer also noted that recent experience has shown that the town does not seem to care about these environmental rules, the Rose Farm development being one of the examples of such an approach. The neighbors decided not to pursue legal action given this assessment of our chances for affecting change. So why are we here today? To let you know that we truly hope your group can take more control of the environmental rules and require the town to live by them, rather than moving its residents to turn to the courts. We also want to let you know that starting today, the site the town building inspector deemed buildable was cleared of 60 years or more of trees and vegetation, the habitat and the buffering land for water absorption. Stop by and see the results. Look at the way the land and the marked wetlands are being treated. You put in time in this commission. How can your work affect the protection and change that it should? Why, when scientists gain knowledge to protect the town's environment in the future, does the town not revise its views and listen? We think all can do better. Thank you. On behalf of Marshall and Rebecca Moore, Kathleen McDonnell and Andrew Swinnerton, Stephanie Marshall and James Breeling, Dawn Jelly, and Eric Downer. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Rebecca, excuse me. You say they filed a building permit. Does he have any, is he touching any buffers or with that, or doing any, if he's building within the confines of what has been determined is buildable lot, we don't see it unless somebody, is going to
No,
violate.
I understand that. And the issue, the issue as we understand it, and that's what the lawyer's advice was that if we really wanted to fight it, we could try, because the lawyer thinks that to rely on a 1967 ruling is not environmentally sound, for one thing, or does it accord with the current rules? But in order to go and make that case and push that point, the lawyer said, all of these arguments have not really been listened to. That perhaps the people sitting in this room are not the ones who have the most control. And so after a certain amount of reflection, we decided that we would not pursue that. That said, we want to encourage you to keep doing what you do and to keep thinking about this, because to have this idea that 1967, when we've learned a great deal more about the purposes of buffering and water absorption and where the environment is in this town, just does not seem right.
Thank you.
What is the 1967 reference? I'm not clear on what the 1967 reference is.
So I can give a little bit of background. I was made aware at the end of last week that a building permit was issued on this property. Assuming the 1967 reference was when that lot became a deeded lot of record.
Yes.
So our shoreline regs do have a provision in it that deeded lots of record, as recorded in the registry prior to the date of that portion of the zoning was adopted, are exempt from the our local shoreline regulations. Doug Eastman made the call that same thing applied to our wetland buffers. Any decision any way to, let me say this differently. In order to, I don't interpret zoning, that's Doug Eastman's call, that's his decision. Any appeal to his decision gets appealed first to the zoning board. So it could be appealed to the zoning board.
But the wetland waiver is a planning board decision, so how is Doug
But-
Eastman deciding that that's,
He's code enforcement
Yeah.
and he's zoning, so it's his responsibility to interpret the zoning regulations.
okay.
And his interpretation is that this is an exemption.
It is. That's his interpretation.
So what are our options? I don't understand what our options are.
Well, as I understood it, I understand it, the options are that an appeal can be made to the zoning board to appeal the code enforcement officer's decision.
Yes.
Now, who does that? Is it abutters? Is it, someone has to bring forth and make an application to the zoning board to appeal.
Correct.
So there is a process in place, as I understand. Who actually makes that application? Maybe it's the abutters, maybe it's the concerned abutters. But there is a legal recourse, a step, a process. And then the zoning board would then hear the appeal and rule as to whether the code enforcement officer's interpretation is, they agree with it or don't agree with it.
Correct.
So there is a process.
Yeah, so as Bill said, unless there's a plan that comes to us, we have no say, and our say is advisory only. So I think your best step would be go to the zoning board with an appeal.
I'd at least
I-
explore that,
Yeah,
because as much as,
I guess I'm trying to put in just a public word that
Right.
says, why do we rely on rules made years ago when
Right.
we have learned a great deal more, especially on a piece of land that had no building on it whatsoever? We're not grandfathering in someone's built house. So I think I'm trying to get just a larger issue of awareness that we rely on old knowledge, and that does not seem wise for a town that puts as much effort into planning and thinking and being transparent as I think you do, and the town does.
but there are rules, and we follow the rules unless they're challenged. And maybe if you want to publicize it more, you try and bring it to the ZBA as another forum to bring the issue out. And,
Correct.
it's
Someone
kind
has
of-
to make that appeal
Yeah,
to the zoning board on the interpretation that the code enforcement officer made on this particular lot.
I cannot imagine that there is a prohibition for the Conservation Commission to make such an appeal.
Yeah, I'm playing devil's advocate. But, I mean, would it make sense for us to, step in and say, like, we would
Oh.
actually like to be able to weigh in on, because that's basically what Doug's call said, right? Is the fact that this is now an exemption to a wetland waiver.
Right.
So there's no oversight, and really, is there some kind of formal process where we could step and say, like, we would respectfully like to be able to weigh in on something like that, considering that the call was made from something from the sixties?
Right.
And that's the appeal to the zoning board.
Right.
We could at least voice an opinion
Right.
if we chose to do that.
and we could bring it to the ZBA?
I would imagine that. you
I would
could.
like to do that.
I've not been a part of that before, so
Yeah.
I'm not entirely clear on the process.
Well, that.
But I can tell you, I did, after I heard that the building permit was issued, I reviewed the building plans, and the structure would impact the wetland buffer.
Well, I would like, I don't know whether we need a motion, but I would make such a motion that we investigate bringing this issue before the fact that, to the ZBA, based on the idea that that they have been questioning the exemption from the wetland buffer. I'll make that a motion, if you
I have a
kind of
motion.
figure out what I said.
Well, are you making a motion to investigate, or are you making a
Well, I'll
motion
make a
to
motion that we
appeal, make an
appeal
appeal
it.
to the zoning board
I'll appeal it.
on behalf of
Yeah.
the Conservation Commission?
That's better. Daniel,
I
write
know.
down what he said.
Well, I'm just trying to clarify.
I think it's worth,
I agree.
forth.
Using today's standards, it would not be a question.
right,
Using today's standards, it wouldn't be a question, right?
right.
So is I agree a second?
Oh, second. Yes.
Okay. I have a motion and a second. Is there any more discussion?
I would, of course, it's late in the process. I would have loved to have had the code enforcement officer here to explain his reasoning here before we move forward. It's always a little tricky when one board files an appeal
Right.
against another board.
Right.
So not saying that it shouldn't happen, but I'm just saying we should proceed carefully.
My only reason for pushing it now would be that he's, or she, with whoever's doing this building, is gonna proceed and we wanna.
That
we
they're
wait
already
2 months,
clear cutting.
You're
What
absolutely correct, Bill. I
Right.
understand.
So I've at least, that's why I start with investigate, because I'd like to see what the CBA would even, I guess they would accept on it. But let's do it. And if we get
Well, we gotta
shot
vote
down-
on it first.
Yeah, well, I'm encouraging the vote.
All right. No more discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, that motion passes.
I'd be glad to get a little more information on this and see how we do that.
Would you also like to follow up with drafting the letter?
Yep,
That would be great.
with a little help from my natural resource. Yeah, and maybe Don too, and we'll see. Yeah,
Okay.
okay.
I think that's as much as we can do for you.
Thank you very much.
I would
Appreciate it.
encourage you, if you have concerns about approving things that are 50 years old, maybe getting something on the ballot to make it so that that can happen.
State law, RSAs,
Uh,
manage a lot of that.
Yeah, I think it's more the interpretation.
Okay,
But thanks for keep pursuing this, and to your neighbors too, whoever they are.
Thank you very much.
thank you.
Just to elaborate a little further, in your letter, it might be worth, I was not aware that work had started. I was home today, my son was sick, but, I was not aware that work had started. It is quite possible that the project needs a state shoreline permit as well. So there might be a couple steps needed.
Okay. I believe we have more public comment. Are you here for the same thing? Is that what these were for?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
There, we have some,
just as my name is
Handouts.
Stephanie Marshall, I live at 7 Nelson Drive, and by way of kind of orienting you to what this is, we have some just packet of information. I won't take a lot of your time, but this came from the building plan. The first sheet is where the site's located, right off of Court Street, next to the Little River. The second page is part of the building plan itself with a scale of 1 inch to 30 feet. And there's the boundary on Nelson Drive, you can see. There's the Little River just down in the lower right, and then the wetlands. And you can see here that with a scale of 1 inch to 30 feet, that there's very little buffer at all to the wetlands. The next page is a copy of a map that when I met with Doug Eastman in the summer about this project, when we first knew about it, and he pulled up for me the map of the wetlands and the little jotting there, which shows the circle, which is where someone could build, and then the line next to it was the buffer zone. And as he explained it to me at that time, there would have to be a buffer zone. And we had constant communication with him, many meetings, many going back and forth. He said there needed to be a buffer zone. Until we got to the lot of record, which was when the deed was done from the church. So what I put in here was just a piece of the zoning regulations, which shows the wetland one, which is 9.1. I don't include all of that. And then 9.3 is the shoreland. And under that, on page 925, it talks about permitted uses. And then this one on 926, which says, number 5, the erection of a single-family residence or permitted duplex, as long as there's a lot of record. And this, according to a communication with our lawyer and Doug, was the reason that there were no wetland buffers, as Kristen mentioned, that is in the shoreland part, but it's not in the wetland, but it was used. The shoreland regulation was used in the wetland. We've already spent $2,000 on this. We could have spent another $5,000, and we just felt we couldn't really get anywhere. My understanding is the date of the building permit ending repeal was yesterday, and today is when they came and cleared the land. So again, I really appreciate if you can do anything about this, either for this or for any subsequent one, to straighten out what this interpretation is. So, thank you.
thank you. Okay, more public comment?
Can you pass this out?
Thank you, sir.
Like handing out tests today.
That's right. Multiple choice.
Keep it face down until you tell us to start.
Yeah. Is that your number 2 pencil? Do you want?
Good evening. I'm Lou Hitzrodt, 185 High Street, and I'm here on behalf of the Energy Committee. And first, let me say I appreciate your giving me the opportunity to appear before you to share with you the Energy Committee's statement supporting a citizen's petition opposing the Granite Bridge pipeline. The sheet I've handed out has the petition on one side, in case you're unfamiliar with it, and on the other sides are reasons for supporting it. The Energy Committee became aware of the petition 3 or 4 weeks ago, and after a good deal of discussion and research, decided that we as a committee should formally support the petition. My reason for sharing all of this with you is that I hope to persuade the Conservation Commission to support the petition as well, either by co-signing our statement or writing one of your own. Very briefly, let me summarize our reasons for supporting the petition and then give some thoughts on why the Conservation Commission might want to join us in opposition to the Granite Bridge project. First and foremost, we question the need for the Granite Bridge project. Its stated purpose is to increase the supply of natural gas, primarily for home heating purposes, to the western part of the state. The U.S. Energy Information Agency came out with a profile for New Hampshire in June, I believe it was. And on it, it states that approximately 50% of the natural gas consumed in the state of New Hampshire is used for the purpose of generating electricity. In the 5 or more years necessary to complete the Granite Bridge project, renewable sources will meet more and more of our electrical energy needs, freeing up natural gas currently used for electricity generation. And the infrastructure to bring electricity for heating purposes to all parts of the state, even the most rural areas, already exists. Wires. The Office of Strategic Initiatives report for January 7th of this year shows that the cost per million BTU is already cheaper as provided by heat pumps, $20.48, as compared to fuel oil, $26.43, and propane, $40.83. Our thinking is, why commit to a long-term fossil fuel solution to energy needs when energy for heating, more accessible to rural areas, can be supplied by clean, renewable sources? Perhaps more important to your concerns, however, are the environmental dangers associated with the Granite Bridge project. The pipeline will pass under the Squamscott. Gas leaks happen. If we want to protect our wetlands, or to continue to be able to stroll down Swayze Parkway without getting our feet wet, we need to do everything possible to reduce carbon dioxide emissions. And every first-year high school chemistry student can, or at least should, be able to tell you that every kilogram of methane burned emits 2.75 kilograms of carbon dioxide. That's about a 3-to-1 mass ratio. Digging a network of pipelines is destructive to the environment. Pushing more electrical energy through already existing wire is not. We think it makes no sense to lock into a fossil fuel future at considerable cost, well in excess of $400 million, and considerable cost to the environment as well. So I hope the Conservation Commission will join the Energy Committee by supporting the petition to oppose the Granite Bridge pipeline. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone on the commission have any comments or questions?
What's the current status of the project?
Of the pipeline?
Yeah.
I believe it's still in the PUC for final determination.
And when are they expected to make that final determination?
Who knows? I can't tell you. But we as an Energy Committee feel it's important for us, no matter what the timeline is, to explain our concerns and our opposition, particularly as it affects the town of Exeter.
We've talked, is it a pressure reducing station?
Metering station.
Metering station?
Yes.
It's gonna be located at DPW?
Yes, that's proposed.
Yeah.
And of course, that's where it goes under the Squamscott, right at that area.
Question,
Yeah.
this is a citizen's petition.
Yes.
Has it been submitted in the town for, be on the warrant?
It will be, and that's why we will, I think it has to be in by the 21st, I think.
Yeah, I used to know those dates. I
Yeah.
don't remember
I
anymore.
believe the 21st is when the deliberation is taking place.
And then if it's got the right number of signatures and so forth.
Yeah.
It goes on the warrant, and it will be again debated at deliberative session.
Exactly.
Right.
Well, actually, it'll be debated at the select board has scheduled to have a public hearing on the budget and bond and warrant articles on a week from today, I think.
Yeah, that's the 21st.
Yeah. So,
So we would be very happy if the Conservation Commission would support our statement.
So this would be an advisory recommendation.
Exactly.
To the select board.
Yes, exactly.
well, as I read the warrant article, it's also an advisory, article is an advisory. It doesn't stop the gas line. All it does is it says that upon passage of this, if it's passed by the voters, is that it requests that the select board send copies of this resolution to Liberty Utilities,
Senators,
the
The PUC and the
SEC.
SEC.
So it is a petition to
to show opposition.
show opposition, yeah. Thank you.
Does anybody feel strongly about this one way or the other and want to make some sort of motion or?
I've already
You don't
got
have
one
to.
letter I've gotta get out. So although I sympathize with this, I certainly think,
Well, you could, as a commission, just sign on to this if you wanted to. You don't have to write another letter.
Just to be clear, this isn't the only gas line today that goes under the Swampscott. We already have two that go under there, Unitil and Northern Utilities, I think is the other one.
Could be.
are they
I know
putting a
Unitil
new
does.
one under,
This
or
would
is
be a
it
third, this would be a
expanding?
this would be a third one.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the line would run along what they call it was a law passed several years ago by the state to do an energy corridor along Route 101. So it's
Yeah.
to run that along 101 from up here all the way to, I think, Manchester.
Manchester.
So, it is an alternative, another alternative for bringing in gas utility to the state of New Hampshire, primarily to the Manchester, the more urban compact areas.
Right.
Well, as I said, we see it as really not being necessary, particularly as more and more renewable sources come online, and if 50% of the current use of gas is to generate electricity, do we really need more gas? Is this really a necessary addition to our energy portfolio?
Remind me again what they say is the purpose of it, is to get gas over to the Stratham area? Does it go
No.
beyond
No,
that?
no,
No,
to
it's-
get to the
Go the
western
other
part of
way.
the state, to get to Manchester and Nashua and beyond.
Bedford and,
So it's coming from
From,
Maine?
well, it's coming from the pipeline that goes through basically, I guess, Hampton. And then, so it's coming across east to west.
When they came to us the first time, I thought it was west to east. And
Well,
I
I
know,
suppose you could pump it either way.
yeah, but I know Epping has a bigger problem too, or at least a problem,
Epping would have the storage facility.
Yeah.
the storage facility, yeah. Well, where does this originate then?
Where, what, the
The
gas?
gas?
Probably, well, it's certainly coming from the Manchester, or from the Hampton pipeline, and where it originally comes from is probably Boston, I would guess, but I don't know. But
No, I-
to us, that's
Yeah.
sort of irrelevant to us. I think that our main concern is that why put more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere if you don't need to?
So, from my point of view, I'm trying to separate right now my personal views from where I'm sitting as a member of this board. I think this petition makes a lot of sense coming out of your committee. And I'm glad this is coming through, and personally, I agree with it. I think as a member of the Conservation Commission, I don't see my position or role in supporting this either way. And I would feel uneasy as a commission saying, yes, this is something I would get behind because of, really the reasons that you laid out here, which I think are very good. But I don't see that falling under our jurisdiction as a Conservation Commission. And because of that, I would feel uneasy in supporting it.
I guess I would simply say, I'm not sure whether you would see it as the role of the Conservation Commission, but protecting wetlands, recognizing that seawater level rise will affect downtown Exeter, the Swayze Parkway in particular. We've all been down the Swayze Parkway, even now, when the water comes up over the road. It's going to be worse. And we're talking about 50 years of natural gas being a primary energy source.
And I completely agree with you.
Yeah.
But again, my jurisdiction as a Conservation Commission member, I can't start regulating just things that affect climate. That's not what I do sitting in this chair. This chair, I look at something as very specific wetland impacts. So if the project came before us and said, we're, going right through here, I would have something to say about that specifically. Mm-hmm. And I can also take steps that are allowed from this chair in saying that we will do our best to conserve, land that we see as valuable when it comes to, water storage or flood protection. But I don't sit here in saying like we should be against anything that would contribute to climate change, regardless of what my personal opinion is.
Okay.
So I tend to agree with you, Trevor, but I would say I have questions about the impact on the river of putting in the pipeline, and that would, I think, fall within our purview. And I don't know the answer to that. What would the impact be on the river and the quality of the water in the river to build that pipeline?
Well, building it is one thing, and of course, possible leak is another. Building it, they say it's going to be 25 feet below the surface, below the water level, below the floor level of the river.
Pipelines have gone underneath the river before, gas pipelines, so there's a process for, I forgot what it's called. Directional
Drilling.
Yeah. Is that?
And they generally have to
And there are very specific rules and guidelines, and it's supposed to be managed. Not to say that nothing can ever go wrong, I'm not saying that, but there are, and it's regulated.
And to get that long of a distance under the river, they have to set up pretty far away, so theoretically, their construction would be far from the river. or the distance from the
Typically,
river.
I'm trying to think, the last time this has been, back for several years ago, I'm not sure the Conservation Commission was involved, Unitil proposed another line underneath the river, and there was, plans for that, and a lot of the staging was on the other side, the Stratum side. But again, I haven't seen any detailed plans for this, but I imagine it would be similar. I know a year or so ago, Granite Bridge came before the board, select board, to talk about, they were looking to lease the property for their station up at DPW.
Yes.
So they went.
They put a down payment on it.
Yeah, and they went through, a kind of reiteration of their plans and so forth. Again, I don't recall, it's over a year ago. There's two sides to the argument. I understand the fact that, we need to stop moving away from fossil fuel energy. But we got, I understand it to be a pun, but we got to find a bridge when we can use renewable energy and the energies now. Granite Bridge, will make an argument, or they have made an argument, that there's going to be a shortage of energy gas needs in the future. That's their argument for making a significant investment in this. I don't know if they're right or not. I don't look at the, the forecast and so forth. But it's...
Well, they'd like to commit to 50 years of natural gas use, which is.
Oh, probably, oh, yeah, oh, I'm sure they're not doing this for the short term.
Yeah.
You're absolutely correct. So, I mean, it's, you gotta look at both sides, it's up to whether the commission wants to do this or not. I'm not, again, it's gonna go before the voters. It's, whether as a commission, we feel that we wanna take a stand on this project, or are we taking a stand on fossil fuels in general? I'm not sure. And to start saying, let's move toward renewable energy. And I think we should move to renewable energy, but we got a ways to go. I mean,
Well,
so, again, it's,
Yeah.
or we can promote it or we cannot promote it, you know?
well, by not voting, this isn't saying that the
Yeah,
commission
that's
is
true.
promoting the Granite Bridge.
I understand.
I'm not by any means saying
Yeah.
that I promote this project.
Sure. And I understand how you could see as a commission that it may not be in your purview. I hope you'd see it the other way, but if you don't, that's your choice. If personally you feel that it is something that, you would like to support, I hope you come to the meeting and support it.
Drew, did you have a?
Yeah, I feel sort of similar to the sentiments also expressed, and I know when the lease came before the town for the DPW metering station, there was a discussion that we had on this commission. I think they asked us for an opinion related to, there was a potential garden plot. Tree farm up there.
That was a piece of
And
land
so
we
we
thought
did,
we had.
there was some,
Conservation wasn't.
we had a meeting or a discussion, and I'm trying to remember the outcome of that. I think we maybe voted, we had no objection to the leasing of the land, but I'm off the top of my head. I just want to make sure
Okay.
we're consistent with what has come before the commission, before.
Yeah, so, and that's correct. If memory serves, something along the lines of no objection to the leasing of the land, but you made a point to keep that decision separate from your future review of the project.
Again, just to be clear, this is a citizen's petition. More than likely, it'll go to ballot. It'll be put on the ballot. It'll be on the ballot for deliberative session, which is February 1st,
First.
Saturday, February 1st. I'm sure it will remain on the ballot for the deliberative session. It gives the commission another month, the month of February, in a meeting, if they then want to feel more comfortable making a statement then, which would then be publicized, because it would let people know before they go to the town meeting vote in March, what the stance of the Conservation Commission is. So I mean, if there is some uneasiness about making this commitment tonight, I guess I'm saying that this isn't a deadline to make that
True,
statement.
true.
I mean, I don't know if you feel, I know you prefer to have the commission make that tonight, but I'm just saying,
I take it anytime I can before February 1st.
before the vote.
Yeah.
Because I don't
Yeah.
think it's gonna be it won't be altered, can't be altered at deliberative session.
Yeah,
So it's a citizen's petition, it stands.
sure.
So that's just an alternative if people would like to digest this a little more.
All right, so they are looking for us to sign on to support this, but it doesn't sound like we're gonna get a vote to do that from the discussion I've heard.
I don't know.
Not tonight?
Well, if we were to sign on to it after further thought and deliberation, it would be after the deliberative session, right?
Correct.
Yeah, but it would still,
So be,
Before the vote.
it would be before the vote, so.
Yeah, the impact is people are gonna vote on this in March.
Yep.
Our next meeting is February 11th, so.
I think part of it depends upon how holistic a view you want to take also of conservation. And maybe that's something that people need to think about and maybe have further discussion about also. It's not just land.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I think that as a commission, part of our charge, I mean, we have specific definitive charges as laid out by the RSA.
Right.
They created a Concom. But I think in the holistic sense, the protection and the overseeing of our environment, to make sure that we protect our natural resources, is in a sense part of the mission of the Concom. So I don't think in that vein that it is out of sorts for the Conservation Commission to weigh in on an opinion on this.
Right.
I agree. Does that change anybody else's opinion to
Yeah.
make a motion? Or
I would still opt to,
put it in our pockets till next month?
but that's,
Yeah, well, everybody give it some thought.
Okay.
And have a little bit more discussion then.
Okay,
Sounds good?
thank you.
All right, thank you.
All right, we'll get on to the action items.
Is there any more?
Yeah, actually, is there any more public comment for something not on the agenda?
Okay.
We'll go to a wetland waiver request for proposed 5-lot subdivision and associated infrastructure at 100 Linden Street, tax map and lot 104-71, planning board case 19-13. So, looks like Mark West is up and ready to talk.
This is where it was set, does it usually face you, or am I supposed to?
You can
Well,
move it if you want.
As long as what's that?
You
well,
Can the
move
camera
I
see
just
it there?
opened it up.
the people in the audience might like to see it. Typically, a lot of times it goes here, Mark, but
Yeah, that's good.
I can adjust. Now, it's close to me and I can read it better.
I was told to,
Okay,
by the guy that wrote your checks.
okay.
I'm really sure it matters, but. Good evening, my name's Ian Winter. I'm here on behalf of IS Realty for the request for the wetland waiver for an additional 4 house lots on the 100 Linden Street address, but it will actually be separated and be off Patricia. Obviously, we have Mark West with West Environmental, and we also have Henry Boyd from Millennium Engineering to answer any of your design questions. So I don't know how much more you need from me, but I will be sitting here next to these gentlemen as they answer all your questions.
Okay, I think it's most helpful if I go over and point at the plan, and I think this is mobile.
Yes.
But essentially, there are two, first of all, this project is directly adjacent to 98 Linden Street, which is a big new project that's been started and includes a very large detention basin here, right next to this property. And they came in and put in a sewer line, so the sewer is connecting out this way, and that's the same sewer this will tie into, but that work in the buffer zone was done prior to approval and then went for after the fact approval, and I don't know if you were involved in that. And at that time, they cleared this whole swath here, and they also did plant a few trees as part of their mitigation, and I've been coordinating with Kristen about exactly what we need to do. The issue with this project for this first buffer zone impact is that Patricia Ave is at a fixed location. There's a turning radius as sharp as they can go to get this way to avoid going into the wetland or even close to the wetland, but then it has to turn back to come into the site. Henry Boyd can vouch for the tightness of the radius, but this is about as tight as it can get. Right, it comes off here, so it's turning this way and then heading this way, and that's why we have a buffer zone impact there. So if the road was over here, they'd be able to stay totally out of it. But this is where they have to start, and this is where they have to get to. So those impacts, we got a letter with lots of questions from the planning office, including questions from Kristen. And one of them related to the waiver had to do, I had done a functional assessment letter, but to have a bigger discussion as to how this ties into the bigger picture as a wetland system. This would be wetland C. it's a forested wetland, and because they cleared so many trees here in the cutting, there's quite a lot of tree throw in this wetland. It's a pit and mound forested wetland with large upland trees that also grow in it, big oaks and white pines, some of which have blown over. It doesn't hold an extensive amount of water based on the staining. I've only been out here in last fall, and also I originally flagged it in the fall of 2018. It's when I flagged the whole site, and then I was back out this fall to start working on this planning board approval. So I haven't seen it to 100% verify it's not a vernal pool, but it doesn't appear to flood very deep. And so based on my 33 years of hiking in the woods and looking at vernal pools, I believe it's not a vernal pool. You'd have to actually go out there in the spring to 100% verify. They did clear this and build a big pond. So if it was a vernal pool, that would have impact on this system already. So this system sort of is a forested wetland in this part. We sort of had before this development a little bit of an undeveloped area between the development on Patricia Ave and the development on Linden Street. Now it's sort of infill type of development, which is occurring here. So one of the questions had to do with whether this had uniqueness and natural heritage function. That's one of the questions that was raised. I did fill out the highway methodology list of questions for that function. And of the 31 questions, there were only 5 that qualified. So this does not really, it's not really a unique system. It is, one of the questions that it did qualify for is there rapidly developing development in the vicinity of this wetland? And that's true. But it's not really an island of habitat yet, as there is more forested area here. The other question was were there rare and endangered species? Again, it's not a vernal pool. The river is quite a ways down this way, so we're not connected to open marsh habitat or high-ranking habitat for things like turtles and things like that. But there is some wildlife habitat value to it, and thus the other issue that was raised has to do with buffering, and we had a planting scheme, and I've added more planting information. And on this, we actually list all the species right on this plan. Instead of just a few trees, which the other buffer zone impact for the other project was doing, I proposed shrubs because you do have some blueberry and scrub shrub habitat so that you'd have a thick buffer. I've also proposed conifers in the white pine, which exists here, so that there's some screening. So basically, this is the buffer zone impact that isn't being restored. And this is the buffer zone, the heavily hatched area is the buffer zone that is being restored with thick plantings, including sweet pepper bush with spreads and viburnum and blueberry. And also, I added some additional planting here out a little on the outer part of the buffer zone because there's a driveway here. So that's the proposal for this buffer zone impact where there's a waiver needed. On the other waiver area, it has to do with a detention basin. Some of the questions had to do with whether that basin could be moved, and if so, where, or and how it could be adjusted. There was an adjustment to it. It was raised at a higher elevation and also moved back so that there was a 5-foot buffer zone that wouldn't be touched. And again, here, we've proposed a buffer plantings, but the detention basin itself has to be in this location because it has to be at a lower elevation than the whole roadway. These are the lot areas, and this is really the remaining area where they can do it. up here, it's at too high elevation. So it is a pretty extensive basin with a micro pool. And so this is where it ended up being located. And where we're impacting the buffer again, we're doing heavy plantings on the slope of the top and slope of the basin, and the trees we'd put along the bottom of the basin. And that's designed to help reduce this impact. This wetland is more of a seepage wetland. It doesn't hold any water. It drains into a larger seepage system that heads down towards the river in that direction. There were two other wetlands. This will be the remaining lot. One other thing is that this lot, the septic system will be retired, and this will tie into the sewer from this lot also. So that's an improvement in this case. So those are I think, most of the questions that I had to answer. Let me just go back and check. Anything else that was discussed? These are all the questions that, I think I've gone over all the questions she raised in her letter. So I'm ready for questions from you.
Where does that wetland drain, the sea? Or is it just?
It's more of an isolated wetland.
Okay.
This is an isolated wetland, and there's another one up in this direction.
So it doesn't drain towards the pond?
No, there's no outlet to it. It's a pit and mound wetland that basically holds water from higher ground on either side.
And how much are we into the buffer?
Well,
I mean, do
we
have-
get right up to it at this point, but then you can see we're on the outer stretches of the buffer here. So
I don't
a lot of this part of the buffer is maintained, and that's why I sort of did some additional plantings. So we are right at the wetland here, but then it goes out in both directions. Here's the buffer line here. So you have a 40-foot buffer here, you have almost a 40-foot buffer here, and then it gets, we're mostly in the outer except right at this pinch point where the highest part of the wetland is. And that's where there's permanent impact, right in this part of the road.
In a wetland B, it says that there are temporary buffer impacts to be restored, is that right?
Yes, this whole area is going to be replanted.
Now, where does that,
That system drains and actually connects with this wetland here and drains down towards the river, which
right through
is,
somebody's front yard or backyard or something?
no, it's wooded right here.
Is it?
It's wooded in this location. I think
That's
there's houses
McDonald.
in,
Right?
Yeah.
McDonald,
Excuse me?
the conservation area.
Well, eventually, it's a long ways before you get there.
Yeah, I think there's a lot in
And
between,
there's a lot in between.
110 Linden.
I just wondered seriously whether it affects a butter at all. I mean,
Yeah,
if we
this
have
is-
heavy rains or something and it needs.
well, I'm not qualified to discuss the actual design of the basin, but I believe there were quite a few questions that they had to address for the planning board regarding drainage and stormwater management, and that was done by the engineer.
Has this gone to the planning board yet?
Not yet,
No,
right?
it's not, or has it?
We tabled it based on this conversation.
Okay, so, okay. A couple of questions, and maybe, I don't know if the Mark or the engineer, I'm trying to get myself orientated here. And I know Lot 5 is an existing lot, there's an existing house there, that comes in off of Linden Street. So I'm trying to line myself up in this configuration of the 4 new lots, I guess I'm gonna call them. Wetland C, is that part of, is that part of Lot 1? Is that part of Lot 2?
I can explain.
Yeah, that's what,
Don, I'm Henry Boyd, for the record,
Thank
with
you.
Millennium Engineering. And as Don had said, how you access this right now is solely through the right-of-way off of Linden. The address for the property is 100 Linden Street, so that will be cut off Lot 5.
yep,
One of the great things, and I wanted to thank Ian and his dad, is that we had a existing septic system out here, which doesn't really help anything, certainly doesn't help the wetlands. So we were encouraged when they allowed us to work with this and actually lift it to the new sewer system. Lots 1 through 4 will be accessed from Patricia Ave. And Lot 4 is a very, very large lot, which houses the Wetland Sea and everything all the way to here. So this entire thing, as I trace it with my finger, is Lot 4.
so that wetland C is part of Lot 4.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Lot 1 is generated, it's the first lot as you enter
Yeah.
on the left-hand side of the new road. Lot 2 is very large as well, as it comes up and it houses about 1/3 of the detention pond. So Lot 2 and Lot 3 share the actual detention pond.
Okay, that was my next question. So the detention pond is shared by Lots 2 and 3.
Yes, sir. One of the questions that you just raised about the stormwater, my engineer, Chris, designed this, but I can tell you that we were challenged by the engineers to even use increased rainfall amounts. So it's sized to meet those, and it meets all of the Green Book standards from the state and all of obviously the local regulations as well. One of the things that we did do as well is that in some areas out here, there's a relatively high water table. So we actually raised the bottom of the pond as well. So not only was it resized, it was slightly moved based on those comments, but it was raised up higher. To address the comment about why the impact, we're not filling any wetland, first of all, so, which is great. No need for a wetland permit, a dredge and fill or any of those things, but there are certain things that you can do with a design for a roadway for safety reasons. We have to enter the site where Patricia Ave touches the site, so we have no control over that. Immediately, we go into a 75-foot center line radius designed for the road, which means that from the center line of the road, this curve, the radius would be 75 feet out here. Any sharper than that, and you really start to get, so it's not so safe. It's a very, very sharp turn beyond that. We kind of like curves that are that short because it encourages people to slow down a little bit, and especially in a neighborhood like this. And one of the things that I wanted to qualify as well, Mark made a response to the location of the cul-de-sac, and it was about receiving the frontage for the lots. That is true. However, the cul-de-sac may seem very large, but remember, we have to accommodate the fire apparatus to get down there, and we have to actually design a template that the fire truck can get around there and get back out. They can do it smaller, but for safety design, and like all the time when we try to design things for shopping centers and those things, there's a lot of guys that can drive a truck and they could turn it around in this room, but standards state that it must be much larger to design for those that probably don't drive as well as the others. So this actually meets its location and its size and shape to meet the standards for the turning template. So we turn as soon as we can, as sharply as we can, and then align ourselves back through here. So I'm glad that we didn't have to get into the wetland. There is obviously some wetland buffer impact, and that's why we're here, and that's why we've hired one of the best scientists, I think, to help us with this project.
Excuse me, what, just out of curiosity, why is the arc of the radius on the cul-de-sac sharper than the arc of the radius coming in off Patricia?
You mean right here?
Well, around the entire cul-de-sac.
Well, that's a very slow speed. So in a design speed for the road, if the road isn't posted, it's assumed to be 30 miles an hour. This doesn't need to be 30 miles an hour. This probably should be about 25. But at this point, when you're going around the curve, Dave, you're really taking the speed out of the car. Mm-hmm. So that can be a much sharper radius than a curve on a roadway where you're traveling.
So there's there's a recommended specs for both those things or just one?
There's centerline geometry standards that we would, in some towns, you have them, they're like 250-foot centerline design radius, which we could never make out here because it would be way out here. A lot of those towns are towns that have 250 feet of frontage, they have 2 acres, which a lot of people have determined to be snob zoning. They don't want anybody living there. Exeter standards for lots are smaller, but the roadway standard, we believe that we've designed it to be safe. It's not-
A roadway and a cul-de-sac are treated differently?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And it's precisely for that. If you look at this, this is a 65-foot center line from the center of the radius to the outside of the right-of-way. I believe it's about 55 feet to the edge of the pavement. So it's different certainly than this, but remember, this is at travel speed, and hopefully they're slowing down here. This is creeping around. So at that radius of 50 feet and you're traveling at 5 or 10 miles an hour, it's certainly sufficient for a car if it fits a fire truck's needs.
Good for big wheels.
Big wheels, yeah.
Who maintains the pond down there?
I believe, and I'm not sure with this, we're gonna be getting into this with the planning board, but I believe that this may be the homeowners association, and they have to have, usually what happens is that the town has the right, but not the duty to maintain some of these, and I don't know whether in this case, this infrastructure is gonna be part of the town maintained thing. The road certainly will, but possibly not the drainage.
The drainage systems, detention ponds can be very problematic,
Right.
especially in the maintenance. And I think the town has taken a stand for a long time that they will not maintain.
Right.
We're not responsible for built infrastructure like that.
Which is a little tricky, because when you accept the town, go through the dedication acceptance for the. Okay. I don't need to start over, right? It's tricky only because you want to make sure that if you're accepting the town road, that it holds up. Part of the road in itself and what's going to make the road hold up is the drainage infrastructure, but Dawn is absolutely right. Most towns they don't have the forces, not only manpower, the money to do that, so it's usually part of the homeowners association.
Okay.
I've advised a lot of the towns to write in those covenants when they accept that road, though, that they say that they do not have the responsibility or duty to do so, but they have the right to maintain it. If, for example, that you had the homeowners association just refuse to maintain that, the town can go in there, they can charge the homeowners association to do it, to go back and get in there and fix the things. They do require maintenance over time.
It will be a homeowners association?
Yeah, it's kind of something up to the planning board, and we're not sure if it's gonna be it might just be lots 2 and 3,
Okay.
as far as like a shared ownership of it.
I just want to get away from having a little bit of a battle, because between 2 and 3, if they're the only ones owning it, you know.
Well, and that's lots 2 and 3 may be worth a little less because of the obligation of maintaining a detention.
But those lots, however it's set up, they're deed restricted, so they can't come in and fill that, for example. They
Right.
can't use it for any purpose.
Right.
It's essentially an exclusive use easement for the benefit of the road. It's an appurtenance to the road. So, having said that, we've done everything that we can to minimize the impact, certainly to the wetland, and Mark has done some enhanced planting, which he's already talked about, so.
Anybody else have anything?
So I had a question about the road, and I believe we were on a site walk at this site in October, was it?
It wasn't for this site, right?
We were on, it was snow on the ground.
Well, it could have been July.
So it doesn't matter one way or the other, but my question is, has there been any change in the road over time as this development has proceeded with regard to trying to minimize the impact on the buffer?
Not really, because we've actually can't move it anymore, Sally, than we have. It has to move here. We do ask for a reduced pavement width because I'm an advocate for narrower roads to begin with, because if you look at some of the standards for some of the towns, a 24-foot pavement for a small road. Now, for Collector Street, that makes sense. But you have overlay costs, you also have some heat island effect, you've got standing, salting, everything is not good about a wider road. So if you look, we've actually narrowed this, and on the subdivision set, we go from Patricia Ave, which is nearly, almost 30 feet wide in some spots, down to a much narrower roadway. So we've done everything that we can to keep that out of there. The other thing that we've also got is this whole drainage system is closed. So it's got curbing. We don't shed any water into the wetland area or the buffer. It stays within the road surface with curbing directed to catch basins here, drain manhole, catch basins here, which goes into a manhole and outlets into a sediment forebay, which settles out the solids that come from the road, and then it goes through this pretty elaborate snake system here, and then goes into another micro pool and treated before it gets out. So one of the other questions, what happens? One good thing is that the stormwater standards are actually changing, whereas Massachusetts has kind of been ahead of the curve for ways and stormwater treatment. New Hampshire now really challenges you not only to store the water, but to treat the water too, once it's released, that it's clean water that's coming out of there. So we don't want to release more water, and certainly not any dirty water.
And was there something in the plan about the snow storage in the middle of the?
That's where we're calling for some snow storage in the middle of the cul-de-sac.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's another great thing about your regulations. The town of Exeter sees fit to allow just a loop with the pavement, and I'm only saying this because I was a conservation commissioner in Seabrook for a number of years. Seabrook, I'd never got them convinced to do this, and they paved this massive, massive circle. And they say it's easier for them to plow, but it's a lot of hot top. It's a lot more runoff. You can't treat it. Hampton, we've had some success in doing this, and actually some of the areas are depressed and they actually receive some stormwater. So we can infiltrate some of that and get it to a different area. So it's a good thing that we don't have to pave this whole thing.
Well, what if the homeowners association wanted to do something with that center thing, planting?
They'd have to go to the town, Bill, because this is actually going to be an extension of Patricia Ave. So this will become part of the town right away.
But the hole that would, because I was thinking that would look nice.
It would.
And the way people do things in Exeter, even going out and planting islands where they don't own the land, people like to do that. And then what they do about the snow, that was like.
Well, they'd have to talk to Paul and Jen over at the DPW, because this is gonna be their road. I don't think there'd be a problem with some small, annuals or even perennials that were planted in there that are gonna die back. But as far as bushes and stuff, I can't imagine. And we also don't want to obscure any sight line or anything like that. So whatever they do has to be very low, if they did anything. But you're right.
And there's utilities there. There's utilities
Yes,
under.
there's actually a fire hydrant and there's a water main that goes on there, but they could do some surface low-growth plantings if the DPW allowed it, and it may look nice.
Anything else? The letter, one of the response letter, and you sort of alluded to it, but one of the responses in the letter about the cul-de-sac, which must be located where it's shown in order for the lots to obtain the required 100 feet of frontage. You had mentioned the fire department and the turning radius.
Right.
If you didn't have to meet that 100-foot frontage, could that be moved, and could that cul-de-sac be moved and still meet the turning radius? We
could move it, but it serves no purpose. It still has to be as large.
But if
would-
you could move it and pull that drainage structure so it doesn't have the wetland impacts, is what I'm getting at.
I'm not sure about that, because we'd have to go into a very radical curve, and we actually get closer to the wetland sea again.
Yeah.
So it doesn't work. I love Mark, but I think he worded that poorly, so. The 100 feet of frontage. That really wasn't the intent of it, to get the 100 feet of frontage, because this lot has about 500 feet of frontage.
Right.
So that wasn't the way, that wasn't the intent to place it there, was to get the 100 feet of frontage. Generally, when you place a cul-de-sac in a road, you do place it in the center of the lot. Rotating it up here does nothing but put a more of a curve in the road. It probably wouldn't eliminate any, because we still have room to put Lot 4's house back here. It just simply makes an odd-shaped roadway and doesn't really do anything for us. Water always does what it's supposed to, unlike us, and it's going to get to the lowest point. It always does right. That is here. So regardless of whether the cul-de-sac is here or here, the detention area is still gonna be here. It has to be here. So when we first did this, it laid out so that there were actually another lot on there. So I can't tell you how disappointed that Ian and his dad were that when we lost one, and it's just like, we can't make this work with that other lot. So they understand, obviously. Has to meet all the standards.
Okay, anything else? Is there anyone in the public
Question.
that would, oh,
Wetland, see, the one on the top.
Top one, yeah.
I know, last year they put in the sewer easement. Is the drainage from that wetland been impeded by that easement, and will it be further impeded by the extension of the road? I mean, I'm just concerned, it's high water in there. Is that water now in that wetland, is that instead of being able to flow south, I think we're doing south, right? Yeah, south. Is it gonna be backing up into other properties along Patricia Ave?
Mark can probably talk better on that.
I mean, I'm just looking at I'm trying to look at the elevations. And there's a slight, there's an elevation drop.
There is
Sort of
no,
slight.
there is no flow going this way. This wetland extends in this direction, and it's a depression wetland. So
But where is an outlet?
it's a depression wetland that holds wetland and infiltrates. It doesn't have a stream associated with it. It doesn't have an outlet.
I would differ from you that it infiltrates. It doesn't infiltrate very well.
Okay, well, I did find sandy soil in this part of the site.
It holds water a lot.
Yeah.
Holds water a long time,
Yeah,
I'm saying. Okay. On the structure, and I guess it was Bill's question about the water coming out of there when it fills up in the basin is gonna drain off in the abutting property. And also that's where the emergency spillway is into, and I don't, let's say at one point in time, who owns that lot? Is it the Moody Reverend Trust
I don't think so.
lot on the,
Yeah, to the south of us,
to the
right?
south, yeah.
Is McCoy's property, 10 acres.
McCoy, and not Moody, I'm sorry, I read it wrong. Okay,
Yeah, and that water, there's always been water draining, because actually the house is currently there. There's actually a small culvert where water drains from what is now Linden Field, to those two buttons. It actually drains across that property through McCoy's and eventually into the river.
That's the planning board. It looks at the drainage structures in their design engineering through the TRC.
Yeah, the TRC's already looked at it, and they've actually sent it to Underwood, who is the peer review agent. So we have another set of engineers, not only us as engineers that are reviewing it, there's engineers that work for the town, and then there's engineers that are hired by the town that they have to pay for to review the work. And one of the comments about that was about the raising of it and using increased rainfall amounts. But as far as what is released, we can't release essentially more water than is already coming off the site. So we have to design that to control not only the rate, the volume, but also the quality of that water as well. So that's heavily, heavily scrutinized.
So you've engineered this, so this detention basin is not going to put more water drainage into the abutting lot.
That's correct. And it's based upon projected rainfalls amounts and then a multiplier onto that because of the increased storms that we're having. It's interesting, you guys probably, and I don't mean to speak if you haven't seen it, but to go out and look at the structures that control the outlet, how these things work, because you'll see that there are the sizes of pipes out of these outlet structures that are sized appropriately so that it can only flow off at a certain rate. They're controlled, so they're interesting to see after they're built, especially the new ones like this. They're pretty high tech.
What is the depth of that detention? It might be on here, but I can't find it.
The bottom of it, the bill here is elevation 44.5, which is actually a half a foot above that low contour grade. But there is a micro pool in here at the end of this. You see there's a snake-looking thing? So what happens is that there's what's called a sediment forebay that it comes into. It fills in that, the solids come out of it, and then it will spill over into the lower part where you see the snake and then direct it to a micro pool, which is, it's just deeper. After that fills up, then it would come out through the outlet structure here. That emergency forebay, the only time that works is when there's a huge, huge storm or there's something that's gone wrong with it, and only at that point would it flow up to that point and off-site.
So I'm reading here, it says that the bottom is 44 feet,
44.5, yeah,
44.5.
yeah.
The sediment forebay, the spillway is 46.5,
Right.
so that's 2 feet. The emergency spillway is at 47, 2.5 feet. So your depth is anywhere from 2 to 2.5 feet?
But that's above the existing ground because we raised that. There's a cut into the high contour. But one of the questions was, if we had such a high water table out there, they challenged us to raise it a little bit, so we've done that.
So the depth is what?
The bottom of that pond will be 44.5. It would intercept the very highest contour of that is about elevation 48, but that's only on that tip right here.
Okay.
Down here, we're actually above the grade, so it's about a foot and a half below grade, I would say, on average.
You all right, Don?
Well,
You
to
all
me,
set,
it
Don?
seems like you guys have put some thought into this, and I mean, there are some buffer impacts, mostly temporary, but I don't see how those are avoidable, it seems, given the scope of the project.
I agree. I think, actually, the impacts to wetland B really don't bother me. I think you guys have certainly done your homework. With the stormwater management, it sounds like this is good, and I'm glad to hear that you're taking, projections into account when you're actually designing this. I think that all sounds good, because it's, yeah. I mean, it's, the permanent impacts to wetland C is what gets under my skin, but just, looking at,
Down here,
yeah, so B, yes.
where the drainage stuff.
Yeah, I was saying, yeah, the impacts, these temporary impacts aren't the ones that bother me as much as the permanent impacts to the buffer, and I just feel it's an ongoing struggle of this commission to say, you know, I just want to scream, get out of the buffer zone, but in this case, it's a little more difficult than that.
Yeah.
Right, they really
Well,
can't.
because we're building a fairly good-sized detention basin.
I wish we could avoid these, and like I said, I wish Patricia Ave came over here, we wouldn't even be talking about it.
Right, exactly.
And we've done everything that we can to minimize it. Remember, if the wetland bypassed this, we actually could petition the state for wetlands crossing and they'd grant it to access the uplands, and we're not doing that. So we're doing the best we can. Not only are we not filling the wetland, we're doing the best we can to preserve it and do what we can with the plantings and everything else.
So you were about 45 years too late to change what Patricia Avenue came in.
Yeah, that's right.
I agree with you, Don. I agree.
So I would just, my lingering concern is really not what you've done, but what will happen in the future with regard to the homeowners association. And the two concerns I have are, one, there's specification in here, couldn't quite find it, but about the use of fertilizers. And the homeowners need to know very clearly that they can't use fertilizers in the buffer.
We can restrict the deeds to say only,
So restriction of the deeds, and can the deeds also require the maintenance of the basin?
they will.
Yeah.
Okay.
The deeds may refer to the homeowners association, which will mandate the upkeep of that. But that's why I say, I've petitioned towns saying, listen, I know you don't want the responsibility to do this, but assign yourself a right to do it if you have to.
The planning board has been pretty good about setting those requirements up as part of the conditional approval
They're very good.
for drainage structures that are private.
Well,
I don't know that I've seen them do what he's suggesting and say, and put in their writing that we have the right to come in here and charge you to do that, do it ourselves and then charge you. I don't know if they've done that. They may have, I just don't know about it. But that's a great idea.
Yeah, so it would be, if it's a violation of the deed, somebody would have
I think the
authority.
town has a right to require it, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess the only example I can think of is the mobile station on Epping Road, and that's exactly what happened. The detention pond wasn't being, maintained, and the town went in and had them maintain it. So, there is a requirement, and that requirement is stronger now through the PTAP reporting for our permits, where, it's not just an operation and maintenance agreement that needs to be signed, that needs to be inspected and reported on each year. So I think we have the existing regs with our amendment to our stormwater regs, 2 years ago, I think it was, that protect us for that. And I think we could certainly make that happen if it is not being maintained by the homeowners association.
Okay.
But if you want to just be ultimately sure, make that request to the planning board as a condition of approval. That the deeds be restricted for the homeowners association being responsible for fertilizer, limiting use of fertilizer, or prohibiting use of fertilizer and maintaining stormwater structure.
Does anyone else have any questions for the applicant? Is there anyone in the public that wants to comment on this project? No. Okay, no further discussion?
I'll make a motion
Okay.
that we have reviewed this application and have no objection to the approval of the wetland waiver as prepared, unless people want to put anything in it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I'd make the second motion.
I would say, I would like the second motion where we say we recommend that the planning board have the deeds be restricted for the two factors that we mentioned, the fertilizer and the
Okay,
maintenance.
I'll change my motion to that we have reviewed the application and recommend that the wetland waiver request be approved with conditions noted below, just the two conditions Sally said, unless somebody wants to throw another one in. That's good.
Okay. Okay, I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? And all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries.
Todd,
What's
I'm
that?
going to abstain
Oh.
because the developer, I'm a butters to the developer.
Okay,
Developers.
well, the motion still carries.
Yeah.
Anyways, yeah, thank you. I'll review that thing. Before we print anything, I'll touch it.
Okay, sounds good.
All right,
It's gonna be a real quick meeting.
Yeah, me too. Thank you.
Sorry,
yeah,
Take care.
yeah.
that went longer than everyone imagined.
Moving on, we have the Climate Summit Workshop takeaways. Trevor, Don, and Kristen are part of that. Anyone want to jump in with their takeaways?
So I'll just quickly start. We attended, the three of us, I think that's it. There were some other folks from the town of Exeter. We had a really good showing there, actually. It was
The whole table.
impressive. Planning board members were there, sustainability committee, town planner, the town manager, I think, was there. Anyway, but we didn't have a chance to talk about some of the takeaways. I personally found it to be a really valuable conference, just to set the stage. I did send a link with my memo. I hope you had a chance to look at that or use that as a reference going forward. That link provides access to all of the presentations, and a huge part of this conference was where to find money for resilience planning. And so there's a lot of resources that we can tap into in the future for funds. So that was eye-opening. I wasn't thinking that that's something I wanted to, the funding part wasn't one of the key items I wanted to talk about. But I will mention a few things that caught my attention, and then you guys can jump in after that. One thing that I thought was unique, the town of Durham, I think he was the town administrator, or maybe it's
Todd's town.
yeah, Todd Selig. He had said that in their site and subdivision regulations, the town of Durham has an energy checklist, and so all developments are required to go through kind of an energy efficiency checklist. And I did pull it up. It's pretty interesting. I shared it with Dave, and I think that's something that he is looking into, whether it's something we could include in our site and subdivision regulations through the efforts that the sustainability committee are doing. But I would be more than happy to send that around if you want to look into it. Because to me, when we amend our regulations, because you do play a role, especially for stormwater management, it's really important that you're aware of the changes that we make, and I think that could be a really interesting one that we could adopt fairly easily. The other thing that I think it was the city of Portsmouth had, so we have received a lot of planning for future flooding regimes and scenarios with sea level rise and storm surge. The city of Portsmouth took that a step further, and they adopted, we know that FEMA identifies our special flood hazard area. The city of Portsmouth took it a step further and adopted what they called an advisory flood area that kind of goes over and above what FEMA protects. And so I thought that was really unique because, one, it's a way to make sure that homeowners within that flood zone are aware of the potential future impacts. And two, it appeared as though, and I haven't spent that much time researching it, but it appeared as though it also has some recommendations for development that homeowners could consider moving forward. They're not required, but having some of those steps, like a certain 3 feet above base flood elevation or something like that for freeboard, or whatever those steps are, I think having specific actions that homeowners can take make it more likely that they'd adopt them. So I thought that was very interesting and maybe something that we could spend more time looking into. The other thing that briefly was talked about was I think it was 2018. I was kind of going to rely on Julie to remind me of the date. It may have been I'm pretty sure it was 2018. The state legislature amended 79E, which is the tax incentive program that we use downtown, to allow you to use it for coastal resilience planning or not planning, but improvements. And so what that means is a town can adopt provisions where homeowners within a certain area or business owners could make improvements to their home, like moving utilities up out of the projected hot sea level rise elevation, for example. And those investments would be deferred, their taxes on that would be deferred until a future date. So they wouldn't be, they could make the investment, make those changes, and not have their property taxes increase for whatever time period the town adopts this for. In Exeter, we're very flexible with how we manage 79E, but to provide an additional incentive, to me, makes perfect sense, because having property owners invest in their property really saves us costs in the long run. So that's something that I talked briefly with Julie LeBranch at RPC. She was very instrumental in that legislation. She's been very involved in it. And we talked about maybe bringing that to the town of Exeter, and not this current warrant, but the next one. So if that's something that you think we should explore, I would love to hear about that from you, because that would definitely enable me to spend some more time working on it.
Again, to understand.
Yeah.
79E has been adopted by the town of Exeter. It's certain districts. So I think the immediate downtown, and I'm trying to think what other area was out of 79E, so it's got to be within that particular district.
So
It's not townwide.
So what we would do is the town could adopt it's like a coastal resilience zone.
Zone, yeah.
And so that zone, overlay zone,
Overlay.
would be different, could be different from what we've already adopted. And changes that you make within whatever that zone is, in my mind, that's the, sea level rise projections, those areas that are potentially impacted from that. That zone, any changes a homeowner makes to make their property more resilient, their property values, if they were increased by that investment, they wouldn't be taxed on that for a certain period of time.
They have to make an appeal. They have to go before the board, select board.
Right.
For the select board to grant them that relief, and they can grant them that relief for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, so it's on an appeal basis. That's the way 79E exists today.
Right.
So, for example, I believe where the Sea Dog is, that came under 79E, they applied to the town to get relief for the work they were doing there, which had nothing to do with resilience, by the way. It had just to do with historic structure, business redevelopment. They were given, for I can't remember how many years, relief. So that process has to be in place, but you have to adopt a zone. And that, they talked about CRZs, right? So, another interesting concept, because that wasn't part of the 79E. 79E before was based on affordable housing, historic work, and economic development. Now, with the new legislation, it adds coastal resilience, flood resilience. So.
And then the last one that we talked about was, there was a fair amount of presentation, and I think the guy was from Portland, who talked about stormwater utilities. Actually, there were a couple.
Guy from Dover, too. Or Northampton?
I can't remember.
Somebody that had something to do with Northampton. I can check my notes.
But there has been some dabbling. I think Dover attempted to adopt a stormwater utility. And basically what that is some people call it a rain tax. So if you have a certain amount of impervious surface on your property and your property is no longer able to absorb water, you're charged in some way, shape, or form for that loss of the ability of your land to soak in water, because all of that water then has to be treated and managed by the town's infrastructure. And so it would be treating it like a utility, because that's what stormwater infrastructure is. And so hearing the progression that Portland had done, I think was really interesting and especially now that we know the added burden, costly burden that we're having to do for the MS4 permit, and for the nitrogen control plan requirements. To me, it makes a lot of sense, and I wonder if Exeter, might be primed to at least explore a stormwater utility.
Yeah, it was a very good discussion. It was a good panel. The individual from Dover was involved.
Yeah.
Person from South Portland or from Portland?
Orland, Ed Soslovic.
Yes, oh, yeah, thank you. They were excellent and they ran a good panel discussion. And talked about the fact that today we have two utilities we do in town. Utilities, we have water and we have sewer. And it's to talk about, because of the increased cost and the attention being paid to stormwater in terms of both quality and quantity, does it make sense to split that out to be another utility and to charge it like a utility as opposed to make it as part of the general taxable fund? So that, in other words, depending on they use some very intricate formulas on how to determine, what your assessment would be in terms of the billing. But it was interesting because I said, with our nitrogen control plan, and just recently the state of the EPA changed what for the health of the Great Bay, is that more attention is going to be paid on the towns surrounding the bay of trying to manage their nitrogen non-point, which is other than plants. So that's part of stormwater. Stormwater plays a very big, important role into the amount of nitrogen that gets into our stormwater and eventually gets into the bay. So does it make sense to start looking at that as a third utility of the town, and using that, splitting that away from, and now all that work, all that money is just lumped into the Department of Public Works budget. And can you split it out and look at it that way? So, and different people would be assessed based on, so a homeowner who's got an 8,000 square foot lot would pay far, far less than a utility than someone who's got a big, a 5-acre development, because they're contributing much more stormwater. So it's an interesting approach. I know Dover tried it, but with no success, but I think there's a lot of good input from this session to get people thinking about this.
Yeah, they really supported a very slow approach to coming at this. So really bringing in all the stakeholders that would be affected. And I think another thing that they really stressed was that this is a very fair and equitable way to start looking at stormwater. It also brings folks that are not generally paying taxes, which is usually how these things are being funded, because it's coming out of our tax money. I mean, we're already paying for the stormwater work that's going on through our tax dollars. This offers a different mechanism, and it's saying the folks that are contributing the most stormwater to those utilities is really the ones that are, contributing the most. So it's a very fair system.
It's a bigger pool.
It's a bigger pool, yeah. But, and Ed especially pushed the fact that this really, you bring absolutely everyone to the table when this goes forward in the process. You bring those that are for it, like I'm sure like a lot of the members here, sitting would be for something like this. You also bring absolutely everyone that would be a naysayer to this. And you sit them all down in a room, and this could be a multi-year process for a task force to really start working through these issues, and what comes out the other end really has to have the support of everyone. And that's the best way to have something like this go forward. And that was the example they used in Portland, where they pulled everyone into a multi-year process and a task force, and there was a lot of people at the table that were firmly against this, and at the end of the year they had unanimous support for it because it was just the best direction for them. And it's never been brought up since. And it worked out well for them. So as a funding mechanism to an issue that will continue to hound communities that don't have a mechanism for it.
And just to kind of, maybe it's belaboring the point, but One of the studies that we had done in Exeter, the Cape study, they did quite a bit of modeling of our stormwater infrastructure. And looking at those maps is really telling of how undersized a dramatic amount of our stormwater infrastructure is for our future climate regime. And so these, very heavy rain, sporadic rainfall events, our infrastructure is not gonna have the ability to manage that the way it needs to. And so being proactive, we do a lot of work for buffer protection, but this is just yet another way to be very proactive and have those funds available to make the upgrades that you need to make by sharing the burden among the people who are creating the
Northampton was another example.
stormwater runoff in the first place.
So the other example too that Don was getting to, Ben Sweeney is the current NOAA Coastal Fellow. He's working with the Piscataqua Region SRS Partnership, who I work with, as well as the New Hampshire Coastal Program, part of DES, looking into basically the stormwater utilities here in New Hampshire. And the example he had talked about was a system that they used in Northampton, Massachusetts. And again, very, very similar things where they came together through a process, and they found something like this worked for them. And not only that, but it when it comes down to it, money begets money, in that they finally had a mechanism to adequately fund these. And because of that, they could bring on someone on, I think it was on the staff, that actually go after additional grants. So now they had capacity to increase the money that was coming in, and increase that capacity, which increased their infrastructure money. And so it was one of those things that sort of snowballed with the benefits. So it was, in that case, it was a very nice, a nice thing for Northampton, Mass. Not saying that that's how everything goes, but it was another example of how really sitting and thinking about this head on and saying, how are we going to fund this issue without just continually pushing it under the rug, and hopefully the tax dollars will take care of it. And some really proactive thinking is benefiting communities that get out ahead of it.
I think it's a great idea. It's really neat. It makes a lot of sense. Did you say DPW was at this? I wonder what their take on it,
I don't know if they were.
what their opinion of this
I don't know.
would be, and who would be the catalyst for such a task force, or, because there's other committees, town committees that would be involved besides us, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, certainly you want to bring in DPW. I mean, I understand now that the town is spending an amount of money for stormwater management, but it's built into your different aspects of your DPW budget. For example, street sweeping is a way of combating, of getting
Maintenance of the stormwater.
good stormwater, so, it's talking about breaking all those things out of the DPW budget that you're now doing and putting them into a third category, or another category, which is a utility. And then you spread, how that's paid for. You're paying for the same amount of money, but you're spreading the cost more equitably, as Trevor says, and that's a very appealing, because then you get more buy-in. And then you get buy-in to go forward, because there's a lot more that you need to do in the future. And how are you gonna pay for it, is always a question. So, I mean, you're talking about DPW, you're talking about, certainly the committees, you're talking about, town manager was there, I think he understands about how to break out stuff from the budget, economic development, what you wanna do is you wanna get as many town entities involved, as well as Trevor says, you wanna get the public involved. It's not gonna happen tomorrow, but you wanna start the process, start the dialogue, get everybody around the table and talk about this. So it's,
And, yeah, to make that a very fine point, I'll just keep hammering it too. This is not one of those things that you just say like, yes, we want one, let's implement it tomorrow. Like, this is like, you start with a very slow and steady exploratory process and say, what will work, you know? So you, it's, again, multi-year. So if it was even something we even think about, like, maybe we want to start looking into, you know, the ball has to start rolling very slowly, and you look out like, okay, maybe 5 years from now kind of thing, like, and the task force too should know that. When you establish something like that, you shouldn't be establishing and be like, okay, you got 1 year to figure it out and have a report. I mean, it could be whoever's now sitting at that task force should know they're in for as long as it takes, really. It shouldn't really have a deadline on it. It's just like, let's keep doing this until we figure it out, and it can take a while. So that was good.
Okay. Anything else on the Climate Summit workshop?
Yes, last one. ARM is coming up. There's gonna be money in the Seacoast ARM pot this coming year. And I can't remember the date for the pre-proposal off the top of my head, but it's either March, I think it's May. It's one of the M months. August is the final proposal, but there's something around $1 million in the pot. So we should be putting forth a proposal for something. So my mitigation subgroup will all get together at some point soon and start talking, because, you know, this is the year. Let's do something. Let's get
Okay.
some dollars again.
And we did have a good presentation from Lori Summers
Yep.
at the summit about the arm, how it's used, and the money that rolls in, how they go through the process of, you know, sorting it out and making the grants.
ARM has some new flashy tools online. They're really cool. So, you know, this could be our year.
Okay, keep us posted. All right, well, next bullet is annual accomplishments and 2020 goal setting. I see you printed out some accomplishments.
Yeah, so you had developed, let me have it in front of me. You had developed a set of goals for 2019. And we linked those to the master plan. And so I just kind of revisited those goals. I'm looking at kind of the bulleted version that's right after the infographic, but
It's towards the back.
what's that? Did it not work?
No,
Oh,
got it.
okay. I photocopied really fast before the meeting, so I was a little nervous for coming in. Anyway, and so, you know, first and foremost, I will just say, it's impressive what got done this year. And I think going through the effort of really meticulously logging what all of that was is worth it, because it's dramatic. And everything that was focused on did have a master plan connection, which I thought was really encouraging. Some of it more directly, but all of it really could relate to master plan goals and initiatives, and moves us forward to completing some of those. Remember, the master plan in its current format is really supposed to be, you know, more of a shorter term planning document than our master plan of previous times, right? And so it's good to see that we're making great progress on that. And I don't know if tonight's the night to do this or not, but I thought it would be worth taking a look at those goals and finding out, are these still relevant to you all today? So that we can, you know, there's some big ticket to-dos coming up this year, the LCHIP application, the ARM grant, these are really big items. And so we need to get ahead in some sort of mechanism, and I don't know if that's in a meeting or a separate work session, or how you want to do it, but we really need to get ahead and figure out how all of this is gonna play together, because there's a lot to get done this year. And it's so much easier if we can kind of figure it out so that our outreach events are spread out and not everything happening all at once.
Yeah, thanks. I think, I don't know that tonight, I don't think tonight's the night to do that. I think it's too involved. I think a separate session, work session would be ideal. We could maybe talk about it, doing it at the February meeting, but then we never know what projects are gonna be on the agenda
Right.
and how late we could be here for that. So I think a completely separate work session makes sense.
I agree.
Well, I would say that too, unless there's nothing coming in the February meeting, and then we could do it then, as a work session.
Right,
Yeah.
so, I mean, I guess we could, our deadline for submittals is January 31st. So I guess we could schedule something after January 31st tentatively, and if we don't have any projects to review in February, we can skip the work session and just do it at our February meeting. Does that make sense?
Yes.
First week of February meeting.
Yeah. Okay.
I agree with Kristen, it's quite a list that she compiled here.
Yeah, when you print that out, it really,
Compared that to a list that Kristen issued back in February of last year, February 6th, where she highlighted, we had a list of things to do and how it was gonna be done. We got a lot of those done, there's still a few, I missed on a couple, I know, but, that was good, we should do it.
okay.
The other thing just to note, so I had sent a draft town report to Todd, he reviewed it, it basically details all of this, but we're also going to include this in there, because I think it's just a nice, quick way to visually see, what was accomplished. Trevor, I had sent him a draft, and he put on his social scientist hat and really helped, I think the recommendations he had really helped kind of highlight and show the emphasis, put the emphasis on the dramatic amount of work that was accomplished. I think you should all be proud of that, really.
It is great.
Yeah.
A great
Yeah, I like the
presentation.
graphic work.
Yeah. So, do we want to get something on our calendars for first week of February? And just, Kristen, do you know off the top of your head what days rooms are available?
No, but I have the calendar here.
Okay,
February 11th is the meeting, right?
is the meeting, right?
So Wednesdays are lighter on our evening meeting calendars as far as town committees. The 5th, I don't see anything scheduled.
So that would be the week before our meeting, so we could decide after January 31st, if we don't have any projects to review, then we'll just skip that, but why don't we say for February 5th tentatively?
35th, okay,
Is everyone okay with that? And does 7 o'clock work?
that's
Or do you-
good.
And so we'll be able to come up with a room?
Yep.
Okay. Okay.
So I guess in prep for that, I mean, I don't know, so you have the master plan recommendations, you have last year's, so I'll just, if in preparation for that, I won't send anything else out, you can just refer to this packet, does that work for you? Or,
Yeah,
I don't think
Yeah.
there's anything else, I can't think of anything else I would need to pull together for that.
okay. And would you attend that?
Yeah,
Okay. Thank you. I know that's another night you have to drive into Exeter. Okay, committee reports. Wait, no, I didn't skip anything. Property management, A, subsection I, invasive plant removal update. Normally I'd ask Carlos that. Do you have anything to add to that,
It's a
Kristen?
nice map.
It's a wonderful
I do,
map.
but I can't find my version of it, but, oh. Oh, here it is. Nope. Anyway, so, what you have in your packet is a map of Henderson Swayze. And all of the plants that have been pulled, Carlos documented with GPS, not just the location, but the species. And so for the past year, all of the logging paths were walked, that there was a concern that we wanted to be sure, invasives would not take off in those now open areas created from logging. We had set some funds aside to treat it chemically, but the commission wanted to take a step back and see the volunteer effort associated with that. And as you can see, it was a tremendous amount of work. We did have a couple volunteer days, and Bill, I think you were there as well for the academy.
Yeah, we had a day when,
So for their climate action day,
Yeah.
15-ish.
They did a pretty good job.
Academy students came out. They were trained on how to identify invasive plants, and then they did some pulling. And then Carlos held an invasive species pulling day where volunteers from the community were invited out. People came out and helped out. By and large, the majority of what you see on that map is Carlos's effort. The amount of ground that the volunteers covered, it was incredibly intense and a lot of pulling happened, but it really did not cover the entire area. So I think, to me, that's really informative for just how big a level of effort it will be to manage Henderson Swayze's logging areas invasive free. But we still have funds available. We talked this past year about hiring SCA and having them come in. We weren't able to get that pulled together last year, but in my mind, that leaves two things. One, I think we should pursue SCA again this year using the harvest funds, and have them come out and spend, I think it was 5 days, and I can't remember the cost off the top of my head. I want to say $5,000 or thereabouts. And then the second thing that I think we should do is really push, just like we did this year for VRAP, really push like a community invasive plant pulling day. And I think Carlos sent an email about that.
Yeah, did he copy everyone on that?
I think so, yeah. And so, basically a call for volunteers, have some set days throughout the season where people can come out and do pulling. They can get a quick education period, learn the plants, and then put them to work, because I think having the community really understand how to identify these. I know when I learned invasive plants, then I went to my yard and was like, oh my gosh, everywhere I go, I see invasive plants, and my yard is no exception, you know. And when I drive around, once you start to recognize them, you see just how widespread the problem is. But having it mapped out the way that Carlos was able to plot, shows that some species are really widespread, others maybe are more attainable for eliminating from that area. So I think that there's a lot more that we can do with it, and I think it's included in your packet more as a thought for this coming year, to show how much effort it is, and to also realize the challenge, but the opportunity that we have to possibly involve the public in this effort. So.
Great, thank you. Fire pits in the town forest. So, yeah, go ahead.
So I'm sorry, I can't even remember how I heard about this. Maybe I had a phone call from a member of the public over concerns of, I know what it was. Don Bristleton contacted me. That's what it was. A little slow. It was around the holidays. Sorry. He contacted me because he had run into people who had for the second landing at Henderson Swayze, the one furthest from the main entrance off of Newfields Road, on the hill, we had noticed, and the interns logged it in their report, a fire pit was there. When Bill and I went out, we found fire starter bricks that were there, and we pulled them. And then when Don went out months and months later, he saw a couple, an older, a adult couple, who were just, warming by a little fire that they set out there. And so he talked to them about the dangers of that. We really don't have accessibility for the fire crews to get out there and address any fire should it escape. We have a process for that. And most importantly, fires are not a permitted use within the town forest. So just because over the years, we've had several places, so 3 that I know of in Henderson Swayze. One just south of 101, Fort Rock, proper, the actual Fort Rock.
Yep.
And now this one. And so my question is it worth doing a letter to the editor? To me, it seems like there should be some response from the commission, just a heads up or something. Is that putting a sign out there? What do we want to do?
And Kristen had asked me if I wanted to bring it up at the commission, or if I would just write a letter to the editor as the chair of the Concom. And initially I said, I'll just submit the letter, we don't need to discuss it. But then I was thinking about it for a couple of days and I said, well, is it homeless people that are doing this? And I don't want to seem insensitive to the homeless issue, so I hesitated to do the letter without at least discussing it, so.
Could I offer a suggestion? I think a letter is a great idea to start. Get it done in conjunction with the fire department. Because then you get the fire department's input on outside burning, why that's not a good thing, and the dangers of it. Maybe give it a little more, it gives it maybe a little more weight if you're getting that input from them.
Yeah.
I'm sure, the assistant chief or one of the assistant chiefs or Chief Como would be glad to sit down with you and help work out a letter.
Okay.
I think that's good. I think a letter would be a good start.
Yeah.
Do we, on our list at the kiosks, do we say no fires?
I think
so.
we do, right? That's
Yeah.
what I was thinking about too.
Yeah,
can't
but
remember.
It's a small icon that,
and when I go into the town forest, I don't go in necessarily a location where there's a kiosk, and so not everyone sees those.
Right.
So both strategies. I mean, we do already
Yeah.
have the signs, but
Yeah.
maybe elevate the
Reminding the public.
presence, yeah,
Right.
and a letter.
There's another one, I guess it's just off our property in the south part where the Henderson Swayze's old stone wall comes to, in a corner. And it's not too far, it's on the other side of the south side of the right-of-way for the utilities. But I don't think we can't really say no there as we could on our own, but that is another problem there.
Used to be a very common gathering spot,
Yes, it is, it has been for,
many, many years historically.
since I've gotten here.
And with regard to the point you were raising about who's setting the fires, if it's a safety concern, in a way, it doesn't matter who's setting the fires.
True,
It's still a safety
right.
concern.
I
Right.
think you could word it, I'm sure,
Yeah.
so that it's not pointed at a particular group of people.
Right. Right, okay.
Good.
Could you do me a favor and send what you've done to who we think at the fire department would be a good,
Sure.
and let them know that I'd like to discuss it with them if they would like to have some input. Thank you. And now trails, volunteer support?
Well, I just wanted to give you a heads up. I mean, it's not the best time of year for trail work. But I did have
This weekend
a
was.
mom and a son reach out. His name is Brian Wells. He's, I don't remember what grade he's in, but he attends St. Thomas Aquinas, but lives and uses Exeter trails, lives in Kensington or East Kingston, I can't remember. Anyway, St. Thomas requires 20 hours of volunteer time for, I think they're juniors. And those 20 hours have to be in the same location, which is the first time I had heard that. And so you know, in the past, he had kind of spread his volunteer hours on a bunch of different projects. So they reached out looking for somewhere they could spend some time. And so I know we get a lot of support for Henderson, Swayze, and Oakland's, and as far as trail maintenance goes. So I had sent him out to the Little River area. I haven't heard back yet, but
He's
he
still
was
out there.
no, but he was familiar with that area, knew the end of Garrison Lane. He was really excited to explore. Both he and his mother were excited to explore a new area. So
Yeah, that trail network needs some more
it really does.
use and help.
And effort, yeah. So, I just wanted to highlight that we do have some, more volunteers who are out there working. And I did suggest to him that if he has classmates that are interested in joining that effort, we have no shortage of, volunteer time that we could use help for. Because it would be really great to kind of, encourage a younger cohort of trail users to maintain
Sure.
the trail net.
Great. Well, thank him.
On the trails, we've had a person volunteer the use of their, what's called a Rokon. It's a wide-tired, basically miniature, large mini bike, small motorcycle. But it's very powerful, it's two-wheel drive, can pull a sled, and would be very useful for getting materials in there for maintenance work. Because one of the big issues about keeping like the bridges in repair and stuff like that is most of it's Sherpa work, is carrying wood in there for God knows how far and how many trips. This machine could bring in most of the materials we need, which would reduce our need for manpower, and our mobility would be much better as far as responding to putting together a project day or something like that. You know, you could get 2 or 3 people to do the work instead of having to organize 10 or 12 people, because you basically, most of the work is just carrying things in.
Right.
And it could also help with grooming the trails, so we don't get the potholing, because walking, riding, cross-country skiing, you know, you get the foot potholes and stuff like that. It makes it miserable for all those activities, you know, freeze thaw,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden, everything's full of holes. So I just wanted to let you know, and I don't imagine anybody would have any objection to that. And it would be, it's not being used, it's not a piece of equipment that's being used recreationally, I guess. So,
Is that something you have?
no, it's somebody Toby knows.
Oh, so it has it, oh.
And you would use it in the winter, you're saying?
Winter, spring, summer.
Whenever.
Whenever it would be needed, yes.
I have no objection of using it, especially in the town forests where the trails are pretty well worn and
I think it'd be beneficial.
Yep, it's
Well,
gonna
I-
help them get the work done, sure.
yeah.
And there was also an interesting, comment on this, group, Fort Rock Riders, because there's been some controversy over leaf blowing of the trails and not leaf blowing of the trails. Well, this past stretch of time, there was somebody out who, I think was out over the end of the last week, or over the weekend, and, they said the Henderson Swayze, Exeter side, where the trails had not been blown, the trails were in much better condition than say the Newfields, what I would call the Newfield side, where more of the trails had been blown down to dirt. So for, you know, whatever the reaction is between an organic base and a soil base, it seemed like the organic base held up much better than the soil base in the weather. So that was just kind of an FYI for, because that's been a subject of controversy in the past, I know. So.
The only word of caution I would, and I don't think that this would be the time that they'd be using that equipment, anyway, but.
Oh, mud season.
So
Yeah.
mud
Oh, no.
season is also, I mean, not mud season. Early spring is also, amphibian migration period, so, you know, obviously, I don't think they'd be out there when it's cool rains, but.
Well, you know, yeah.
There are times that some area, and Oakland's and Henderson Swayze have quite a few. vehicles.
I would have a real issue, as would Toby, and we will be keeping an eye on it, about that going out there when the conditions are appropriate. Because, you know, you could do some real damage if you went out there in the wrong weather. So,
It might be helpful to maybe put something up on the website or something so that the public knows that it's an approved use. So that we don't get a bunch of phone calls,
Yeah, I can ride my mini bike out there. Yeah.
yeah, I don't, you know, it's not something that's gonna be out there on a weekly basis. It'd probably be more, a daily basis, I would say. It could go months at a time without it being out there, and then you could have maybe a 2 or 3 week stretch where it's out there for each weekend or something.
I wouldn't want to give people ideas.
Yeah.
No.
Oh, boy, we can use, maybe my four-wheeler that has big tires, I could use
Right.
it. And there'd always be somebody with it who's doing maintenance work. Could
Oh, yeah, it wouldn't
be explained
it
to
wouldn't be out
anybody
there.
walking by.
Yeah, they wouldn't be out there joyriding,
Right.
no. So,
I think it might be a good idea if they keep you aware of when they're gonna be out there with it.
I will be,
Okay,
yeah.
all right.
Yep.
It might be worth mentioning that Dave got the signs up on the tunnel, on each side of the
good.
tunnel, if you get lost
Yeah.
up there.
It says you're now at the tunnel.
Other than that, it's just
You are
great.
Light at
maps.
the end of the tunnel, both ways.
You were at the tunnel.
All right, outreach events, report on winter solstice celebration, Rains Farm.
So,
Sally?
I would say the event was a big success. We had a lantern parade, and that was Kristen's idea. Thank you very much. People who came really enjoyed themselves. We had a great bonfire. Ben Anderson helped a lot with that. My husband Malcolm came and started the fire for us, which was great. Ginny was there. Ginny and Kristen and I were there setting up, and parking was not a problem. The conditions were great. The weather was nice. The ground was frozen enough to walk. It was good that the Eversource work had just completed because they'd pulled up the mats and there was a relatively clear trail, and people could park at the rise of at the ridge. And so it was great. We had lanterns to light up the path. We had refreshments. We lit up the barn. It looked very impressive, as Bill reported. He came a little later and saw that the barn was lit up, and it was very impressive. And we had, I think the people that came really enjoyed it, and we got comments to the effect that, wow, we didn't know what was going on at Rains. We didn't even know about this property. So in terms of our strategy of having the event just as an event in and of itself, but also as a means to educate the public to what we're doing out there, and that it is public land. Come and use the trails, and the barn is there for your enjoyment when it's open. And so I think the strategy of getting the word out and also increasing public support for what we're doing out there was very effective. So I thought it was great. And we have ideas about what we will do again next year, and hope for equally good weather. Public Works was great in terms of plowing, so that, because it had snowed right before the event. And we were a little concerned about people being able to walk to the barn, but it was packed down by that point, and the parking lot had been plowed. So I thought it was great.
Good.
Sally also had a great idea and bought some lanterns that we put along the path from the parking lot. They were great, you just couldn't, they were very good. And I wonder whether the commission should purchase those from Sally, so that we have them. And I would go for that, if you want.
Sure, I mean, I'm willing to hold on to them, but if the commission wants them, I'm also willing to.
Well, I would like to reimburse her for what she bought.
So we used 6, and they're lanterns that are LED lights, and they're battery powered, and they were pretty cheap at job lots. I didn't spend a lot of money, but they're very effective.
Do we have a cost, like, we can make a motion to reimburse Sally
Yeah,
for the purchase of 6?
Well, yeah, I mean,
Receipt?
they were $9.99 a piece, and I'm willing to carry some of that as a contribution to the commission, but that would be great to have
Well,
some.
that's $60.
Let's call it $60.
50
Make a motion to reimburse Sally $60 for the purchase of the lanterns,
lanterns,
Second.
camping lanterns.
camping lanterns.
second.
Do we have a category of where to take that $60 from?
Supplies.
Trails. They lit the trail.
To be determined.
Yeah, I mean, so outreach activities tend to go under community, what do we call it, community services. But it could be used for anything, so
Okay,
I think they all.
all right, I have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
I'll abstain.
I'm investigating with Jeff Beck the possibility of putting a light on the east side of the barn, which is the one facing the river, that would be motion controlled, so that we would have some light there if we're out there. And number 2, I think it would be good to maybe discourage some of the occasional horseplay that we get out there. A little bit, if light went on, that might deter a little bit. But he's gonna get back to me on that.
Okay. I thought it was,
Oh, sorry.
I just was gonna say, I thought it was interesting, you said that many people commented that they didn't know it was public or whatever. Because the new sign, or newish sign, I think is very obvious from the road, the L-chip sign, that makes it somewhat obvious that it's public land. So,
Yeah, I just think when people are driving by, if they don't happen to look, they
Yeah.
don't know to look.
right,
So I think, again, having the events that we've talked about,
Right.
I think it's a good thing for us.
Okay.
While we're on rains, I did put out a memo saying that John Torberg would willing to make more signs for not
Yeah.
only rains, but any of the properties. And I've gotten 1 or 2 suggestions, but I would welcome any more. He's very willing to do it. He's got the time and he likes to do it. The one whole thing that I'm not sure quite how Kristen, I guess, suggested that the Irving sign, the sign out at the Hayes Irving property out there, it's a bigger piece. It was probably a Reedy sign at one time, because it's got a bird on it and nice.
Yeah.
He's not up to doing that kind of thing, unfortunately. Whether just, he's into, engraving boards like we've had before. But that might be something to look into. If the commission wanted to, I could investigate and see. Reedy's out of business, but I don't know who else does that.
The other, I noticed, yesterday that the Smith Page sign is down.
That's
So
another
that could be
Reedy
another
sign.
one.
Uh-huh.
Before
Look,
we
yeah.
leave rains,
Go ahead.
I just had a quick comment. We also opened up the downstairs, and I know we're almost shy to do that because it's filthy, frankly, and, very rustic and could use a good blowing out, but people loved it. Like, that was the amount of enthusiasm for seeing the downstairs of that barn was really surprising to me. And so I think we shouldn't, I mean, we should do words of caution, but we shouldn't worry about just a quick walkthrough when we have events there. People seem to appreciate it.
That's where they milk the cows.
Yeah, exactly.
It really builds a lot of that, because you feel that more than empty stalls in a barn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, upcoming, open barn days. Do we have a date and time to be determined?
So they're pop-up. It depends
Yeah.
on the conditions
Yeah,
and people's availability. Jenny was interested in doing one in January, and it just depends on whether or not we have the right weather conditions. So
okay,
we were thinking, we sort of went back and forth about should they be scheduled or should they be pop-up? We thought they should be pop-up because we don't want to have to cancel them because the weather's
Right.
not good.
And so I put out a call on Facebook and the town website that if you're interested in being notified when these events occur, and I think I have like 15 people who
Good.
reached out interested in being notified, so.
Yeah, so the
I think
idea is
it's a
people
great
come and
idea.
use the trails, snowshoe, whatever, and then they stop into the bar and have some hot cocoa, and somebody from, a volunteer, one of us would be there to be hosting it.
okay, great. And then we have planning for the full moon snowshoe, which is February 8th.
Yeah, so I'm not entirely sure who
Yeah.
is leading that or what the plan is for there. I know we picked
We
the date,
talked
but-
about it with the date,
Yeah,
I was involved in it last time and I can continue to be involved in it.
We also,
David O'Hearn was
David
gonna do
O'Hearn
the
was
fire.
involved.
I think he was gonna do the fire.
He was
again.
gonna do the fire, and Trevor was assistant fire manager out there, and actually, he kept it going, even though it didn't.
But we need to
Lost
reach
it.
out to,
I was
David.
out too with leading one of the hikes, and it was a beautiful night to do it. It really, and it was crusty, so some people could walk even. But I snowshoed.
Yeah, that's right, we talked about it, it's the same night as our deliberative session.
yeah,
But
but
there's nothing in our
No,
minutes
deliberative
about,
now
session's the
deliberative
first.
session is the first,
Yeah.
so,
oh, it got moved.
yeah.
and then, there's no discussion in our minutes about people volunteering to be.
Okay,
Huh.
so I have Drew, Trevor, Bill, and I'll reach out to David O'Hearn and connect you all.
Great,
Yeah, and I think we just need to advertise. I did the hot chocolate last time. I can do that again.
That'd be great.
I mean, it's pretty condition dependent in terms of what the walk will be like if we just, and weather. So I think that last time we actually did walk around quite a bit before going to the Irving property, but like we could kind of just see how it goes and who actually arrives and wing it.
okay.
Great. So good to send that notice out then.
That's 6:30.
Yeah, and is Parks and Rec, are they,
So they weren't able to help, but they're interested in
they can advertise?
helping share the word, yeah.
Okay.
Okay,
But they weren't available that night.
And I know Allison came last time, I don't know, if we
Uh.
couldn't volunteer her right
Yeah.
now.
Ballin told her.
yeah. All right, the next thing on the agenda is the Tree City Subcommittee. Before you get into that, Sally, I did get an email from Eileen Flockhart this week. She asked me about when they have meetings, should they be posted? Should they be public? Should there be minutes? I responded and said, they should definitely be public, and that I'd check with you on questions about posting and finding a room and, minutes, so,
So she did reach out to me.
oh, okay,
And I kind of gave her the right to know spiel and what needs to happen and the deadlines for minutes and all of that. I can do the posting if she provides me with the agenda.
okay.
And then there was a date that was picked for the 21st.
Yeah,
Is that right?
the 21st. of January.
Of January, yeah.
Yeah, the 21st. And
At
it is going to
8.
be here in the downstairs, the room downstairs, I think.
The wheelwright.
Yeah, the wheelwright room. So that will be posted and it will be a
At
public
8.
committee like other committees.
Okay. Do you have any other updates on that?
Just to remind you that at the last meeting, I'd said we'd find out by March. And like the next day, we found out that we were approved, which was great. So we haven't had a meeting since then, so I don't have particular updates other than to say we're having a meeting on the 21st. And there are things on the agenda that we want to take care of, including revising our tree ordinance to meet the standards of the tree city. So I think it's a really positive thing. And we do have someone in town who contacted Bill who's interested in basically providing some trees to be planted. So we'll take that up.
The elms, what was it?
Oh, yeah.
The new elms.
Liberty Elms.
Well, Sally, I'd like to be involved in donating that.
Great,
also.
wonderful.
Yeah.
I'll put that on the agenda. So I'll give you a report after we meet at our next meeting about what we decide and what actions we're taking. But it's a great group and everybody's really enthusiastic, so.
Who's the warden?
Jay Perkins.
Oh, Jay's gonna be,
Mhm.
okay,
He was actually designated by the select board
okay.
to be the tree warden.
No, he's perfect for that.
Or was he voted on by the town? Can't remember.
I think it was the select board.
Oh. Now, this is a subcommittee that was designated by, who created the subcommittee?
The Conservation Commission.
Con-
So it's an ad hoc subcommittee
Yeah.
of the Conservation
Yeah,
Commission.
they went to the select board to, actually, I think they wanted to be on the a subcommittee to the sustainability, and select board recommended that they be a subcommittee to us rather than the sustainability. So they came to us. Okay, next is approval of the minutes for December 10th, 2019. Does anyone have any edits or comments? Otherwise, I'll accept a motion for that.
Move that we accept the minutes of, whatever it was.
December 10th?
December 10th, right. I did read them.
Second?
I have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? I figured that. Don Clement abstains. And that motion carries. Do we have any correspondence?
Just 2 items. We received a request for additional information from we didn't, sorry, the Epping Road Monahan project, the Gateway property project that was before you not that long ago. They received a request for additional information, mostly related to the conservation deed. DES wants to have a baseline report, all of those things that you identified wanting to have as well. So it was nice to see a little duplicity there. And then the other thing I wanted to let you know about was the select board signed an intent to cut for the southern part of town off of Drinkwater Road. Access is actually Katy Lane. So 2 other communities are involved because you enter in Kensington and then the property is actually in, is it Hampton Falls? I forget the name of the town.
Could be.
It's probably Hampton Falls.
Hampton Falls.
Yeah.
All right.
Anyway, there are prime wetlands involved on this property, so I reached out to DES, and they're aware that there's prime wetlands involved, and they are in the process of reaching out to the logging company to make sure that the logging company is also aware prime wetlands are involved. So, it may or may not be coming forward to you, but I just wanted to give you a heads up.
Okay. Anybody else have any other business?
Make a motion, we adjourn.
Okay, after I note that the next meeting is scheduled for February 11th, 2020, with a submission deadline on January 31st. And I have a motion to adjourn.
Second.
And we are adjourned.